Hi seniors, it's Mrs. Kane. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm going to continue talking about adding and subtracting rationals today, but instead of looking at rationals that have the same denominator, we're going to focus on those that have unlike denominators. So just like with regular fractions, it's a little bit more work when we do not have the same denominator. So I'm going to start with a warm-up just to review what I talked about in the previous video, which was last week. When we add or subtract rationals that have the same denominator, all you do, you keep the denominator the same and then you combine the numerators. So in the warm-up, notice that we're adding and we already have common denominators. So it's like if you add 1/3 and 1/3, you get 2/3. Okay, so it's simple enough when you have a common denominator. Just keep that denominator the same. And then because there's a plus sign in the middle, we're going to add the numerators. So we have to put like terms together. We have 4x squared plus x squared, which is 5x squared. And then we have negative 5x plus negative 2x, so that's going to give us minus 7x. And then the last set of like terms, we have a 7 plus negative 3, which is positive 4. And so our first answer is just 5x squared minus 7x plus 4 all over 2x plus 3. Okay, so for the next problem, we're subtracting. So the only thing that's tricky about subtraction is that you have to make sure you distribute the minus sign. Okay, so similar to the previous problem, we already have that common denominator. We have an x plus 1 on the bottom. And so we're going to keep the x plus 1 as the denominator, and then we're going to put our like terms together using subtraction this time. So we have 5x minus 2x, which is 3x. And then we have 6 minus negative 4. And we might want to write that out. 6 minus negative 4. So that becomes a plus sign, and we get positive 10. Okay, and so the answer is 3x plus 10 over x plus 1. So again, the key to adding and subtracting is that you need a common denominator. So when you have a common denominator, it's pretty simple. So what do we do if we don't have a common denominator? So that's what we're going to talk about in today's lesson. So the first thing you have to do is you have to find a common denominator. So if the denominators are not the same, then you have to find a common denominator. And then you have to adjust the numerators, and then you can proceed like we did in the warm-up. Okay? So the first step to finding a least common denominator is to factor the denominators, and that's only necessary when you can factor them. Okay, if they're not factorable, then all you do, you're going to list the factors that appear in either denominator, and then you're going to multiply those factors. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. So we have 3 over x minus 3 plus 2 over x plus 5. So those do not have a common denominator. You can't just write that equals 5 over 2x plus 2. Okay, that's not how it works. So the first thing we have to do, we got to find the least common denominator. Now, x minus 3 and x plus 5 are not factorable. Those are just single factors. So if I look at step 2, list all factors that appear in either denominator. So one of them has an x minus 3 and the other one has an x plus 5. Okay, so step 3, multiply all these factors. Oh, okay, so instead of putting a comma here, I'm going to multiply x minus 3 and x plus 5. Ding, 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 that's your common denominator, okay? So what that means is in order to add these, we have to rewrite each fraction with this denominator, x minus 3 times x plus 5. Okay, I'm going to put my original numerators back on top. All right, now the key is to look at your original denominators and your new denominator. So the first one started with an x minus 3. What did you multiply x minus 3 by to get x plus 5? Oh, we multiplied by x plus 5. And then look at your second denominator. What you started with x plus 5. What did you multiply that by to get your new denominator? You multiplied by x minus 3. So multiply the top by x minus 3. Okay, now the next step is to add the numerators. But before we can add, we have to distribute. So I'm going to distribute. I don't want to rewrite this whole thing, so I'm just going to distribute right here. I'm going to write 3x plus 15, and I'm going to cross that out. And then I'm going to write 2x minus 6 and cross that out. So now I'm ready to add. Okay, I have a common denominator of x minus 3 times x plus 5. And now on the top, I have 3x plus 2x is 5x, and 15 plus negative 6 is positive 9. And so the answer is 5x plus 9 over x minus 3 times x plus 5. Okay, so there's a little bit more work up in the front where you have to find that common denominator. All right, let's try another one. So LCD. So step 1, factor the denominator if necessary. So notice in this problem, we can factor this denominator here. Okay, we need two numbers that multiply to positive 5 and add to positive 6. So we can factor that into x plus 5 times x plus 1. Okay, so if I look at step 2, it says list all factors that appear in either denominator. Only list shared factors once. Okay, so what that means is that x plus 5 is a shared factor. We have an x plus 5 here and we have an x plus 5 here. So when we list that in our LCD, we're only going to write it once. Okay? And then notice we also have a factor. Let me go ahead and highlight these. So we have our x plus 5 as a shared factor. We list that once. And then we also have an x plus 1. So we need to list x plus 1. Okay, and then what does it say to do with those factors? Multiply them. So your LCD is going to be x plus 5 times x plus 1. Okay, so now we're going to rewrite each fraction with a denominator of x plus 5 times x plus 1. All right, now notice that first, I'm going to put my numerators back on top, 3x minus 2 and 5. And notice that your first denominator, you didn't multiply by anything. You started with x plus 5 times x plus 1, and now you have x plus 5 and x plus 1. So you do not have to change the 3x minus 2. Okay, but if you look at the second set of denominators, we started with x plus 5. What did we multiply x plus 5 by? We multiplied it by x plus 1. So we have to multiply the top by x plus 1. Okay, and now we need to add the numerator. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute this 5. I'm going to get 5x plus 5. And so now I'm ready to combine. My denominator is x plus 5 times x plus 1. And then on the top, I have a 3x plus 5x, which is 8x. And then I have negative 2 plus 5, which is positive 3. And so my answer is 8x plus 3 over x plus 5 times x plus 1. Okay? Now we're going to practice that a couple more times, but this time we're going to use subtraction. And the only difference is in the very last step, when you subtract, you have to make sure you distribute your minus sign. All right, so let's see if we can do this LCD business a little quicker. So we have an x plus 2 in the first fraction, and we have an x plus 1 in the second fraction. We don't have any common fractions, or I'm sorry, any common factors, so all we do is multiply those. So the least common denominator is x plus 2 times x plus 1, and so we rewrite each fraction with that denominator, and then we're going to have to adjust both of the numerators. So I'm going to put my 6 back here and my 2 back here. And then I want you to look at your original denominator, x plus 2, and figure out what did you multiply that by. And then look at x plus 1, what did you multiply that by. So we multiplied x plus 2 by x plus 1 on the bottom, so we have to multiply the top by x plus 1. And then we multiplied the x plus 1 by x plus 2, so we multiply this top by x plus 2. Okay, and then the next step is to distribute first. So this is 6x plus 6. This is going to be 2x plus 4. And we're going to subtract. So we have 6x minus 2x is 2x. And then we have 6 minus 4 is positive 2. Okay, and then the numerator stays x plus 2 times x plus 1. Now, if you want a little extra challenge, notice on the top there's a GCF of 2, so we could take out a 2, and we're left with x plus 1. And then on the bottom, we have x plus 2, x plus 1, and we now can simplify. We can cross out the x plus 1s, and we get 2 over x plus 2. Now, for the purpose of this class, especially with this e-learning period, that original answer would have been fine right here. Okay, but if you recognize that you can go a little bit further, then that would be great. All right, one more subtraction one. So notice the first step here is to factor. Two numbers that multiply to positive 20 and add to negative 9 are going to be x minus 4 and x minus 5. And so when we find the LCD, we have a shared factor of x minus 4. and we have a single factor of x minus 5. So any factors that appear once or that are shared. Okay, so we're going to rewrite each fraction with that denominator, x minus 4 times x minus 5. Okay, and notice that second fraction did not change. That denominator did not change, so I'm going to keep my 3x plus 8 on the top. And then for the first one, I started with a 4, and then look at what did we do to the original denominator, x minus 4. We multiplied it by x minus 5. Okay, so distribute the 4 to get 4x minus 20. And now we can put our like terms together. So our denominator is going to stay at x minus 4 times x minus 5. And then we have 4x minus 3x is 1x. And then negative 20 minus 8, remember to distribute that minus sign, is negative 28. And so we get x minus 28 over x minus 4 times x minus 5. I'd like you to pause the video and go ahead and try the last problem. I'm going to go through it real quickly, okay, for when you're done. So the LCD is x plus 1 times x plus 4. So we rewrite each fraction with that LCD. Okay, put the 5 and the 3 back on top. For the first fraction, you multiply the bottom by x plus 4, so multiply the top by x plus 4. For the second one, you multiply the bottom by x plus 1. Distribute to get 5x plus 20 and 3x plus 3. And then lastly, don't forget to distribute that minus sign. So you have 5x minus 3x is 2x, and then 20 minus 3 is positive 17. And so if you got 2x plus 17 over x plus 1 times x plus 4, you are in good shape. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to ask you to complete the short assignment on Schoology and submit that for me. Talk to